Robert, I think you and I presented enough yesterday that we don't need to introduce ourselves, but Bimal, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. This is Bimal Sheth. I've been with HITRUST about 4 years now. I am the EVP of Standards Development and Assurance Operations, which is a mouthful, but basically it means the teams that QA assessments and develop the framework all report up into me. So,
Thanks, Bimal. Yeah. And so today we'll be talking about, I'll go back one slide, trustworthy AI and the concept of not only making sure you've got an AI environment or an AI adoption model that addresses the appropriate security risk, and it does so in a sustainable way, and it does so in a manner that you can use to communicate assurances to others around the strength of your security controls over AI and just the whole process there. And we're happy to share in this session today a bit of our roadmap that we're running toward very aggressively by way of helping equip what I just described to the HITRUST ecosystem. And we're calling that the AI Assurance Program. And we'll talk about what we're doing now and what's almost immediately available in like the next few weeks, and what you can start with to build toward an eventual really clear and transparent and reliable approach to demonstrating to those that are interested inside and outside your organization just what you're doing to address AI security risks and how that has been incorporated into your entire system of trust that your organization is building up. And so, in my view, there have been a number of factors that have caused a shift in the threat landscape this year period. AI is the most notable, in my opinion, and it goes without saying there's a bunch of stuff that have contributed to this AI kind of, not bubble, it's the wrong word, but I feel like there's a pop of the media attention that AI is getting. And it goes without saying, computing process is getting cheaper, it's getting easier to get, it's getting easier to incorporate your workloads into cloud environments and into affordable approaches that you need to actually have this data capability. And I say data capability because AI is on top of a massive amount of data. So the AI race is on, as you know, to incorporate generative AI and other kinds of machine learning into not only your customer-facing products, but into your IT operations and business operations to achieve efficiencies internally. And I think there's a wave of marketing content that's going out from companies that you traditionally wouldn't think of as super innovative because they're able to stand on the shoulders of these large language models and do more, faster with AI than they could have otherwise. I left my drink at the bench only to be able to hold the clicker and the mic, so I apologize. So everyone is either thinking of adopting it or has already started to adopt it in some way. So what does that mean from a security perspective? Well, from a security perspective, the question is going to be, how do I actually communicate that I'm doing it right? Managing the risks of AI systems is critical, and I've got a little bit on that later on. But failing to manage those risks of AI systems could introduce a really different kind of threat, a different kind of experience than we've seen before in the traditional kind of threat modeling, threat actor kind of landscape. So there's very unique challenges that this is going to introduce and is introducing right now from a threat and risk landscape perspective. So not to oversimplify it, but I think about it this way. Adoption of any new technology brings about new inherent risks. And with new inherent risks, you need controls and you need ways to mitigate those risks, right? So this is just another piece of technology that I'm bringing in. It's one way to look at it, but I argue that it's not just another piece of technology, and that it's kind of a special thing because it not only has the new inherent risks that all technology brings with it, but it's got its own very unique inherent risks that we have to think about from a very different way. So I've got a clip from our podcast. We'll talk a lot about our podcast later on. A clip from our podcast. We're talking to Omar, our field CISO of Databricks, about do we need new controls for AI? So let's take a listen.
And there's a whole world of jargon that had been sort of building itself up over the last 15, 20 years while I've been heads down learning and trying to keep up with cyber. And so on the one hand, the typical security leader, CISO, understands and accepts that they're not an expert on it. The part that is really concerning for me is that the knee-jerk reaction, which I would also say would be my reaction if I was a CISO, but now being sort of at an AI company, it's easy for me to judge other CISOs. The knee-jerk reaction is, Omar, it's not really that different. We don't really think we need new controls. If our employees are going to it, it's all going to our website, it's all data. So we know that we've got web proxies and we've got DLP and we've got training. And if it's our products are building AI into them, we've got product security and we've got SDLC and we know how to do that. And it's data going into some kind of code and it's spitting something out. We've been doing that for 10, 15 years. So yeah, we don't really think we need new controls. And if we do, we'll look at it later. And that sort of is the reaction I would have, because I would look at my already oversubscribed plate of things to do, and the last thing I want to do is admit and acknowledge that I've got this whole new field that I've got to go figure out, because the way I think about threat modeling, the way I think about risk assessments, the way I think about assets, all of those paradigms are built for a fixed world where code doesn't change by itself. It's not accessible to the entire universe. And now I've got to go rethink my own paradigm, which I've spent 10, 15, 20 years developing. And you want me to throw that out the window? I'm the freaking CISO. I've got chief in my title. And if you force me to rethink all of this, you're telling me I need to go back and be an intern. So I think that, if I'd say to answer your question, Jeremy, if I'd say there's one thing that's really important, is for every security leader to be thinking, I do need new controls, I do need new paradigms, I do need new ways of protecting AI, of enabling the business, of effectively managing risk, as every business is going and deploying LLMs and using AI and going to this brand new world.
Yeah, so thanks, Omar, for that. Appreciate that. Interesting episode on trust versus AI. Just aired like a week ago, so check it out if you haven't. But to emphasize some points there, the key aspect of AI is that it learns. And by learning, it will behave differently in the future than it does today. So very different from a traditional piece of software where I build it in a certain way and I can expect it to operate as it operated during the test environment, during QA, until I change it again. So this static output, the analogy I like is rules for building a regulation football. I have these rules and it goes to the machine and it's always a football within the regulation spec, right? To pull on that analogy, these systems are more like an elite athlete, because just like the elite athlete, it has to be trained, it learns from the inputs, it gets better over time, and it requires monitoring to ensure that it's going to perform at its peak and it's going to perform in the way that you want it to. So from this perspective, AI is a very different thing and it needs very different handling than we've traditionally handled software and thought about how we control our software and get the software to behave in the way that is within our acceptable sort of risk margins and risk appetite. So what do we do with this from an assurance perspective? HITRUST is an assurance company, in my opinion. So what does it mean, right? If I look out and see sort of where the assurance and security regulations and other bodies are at, it's confusing at the moment. And this is a new emerging tech, so of course it's not going to be perfect yet. So there are some AI regulations that are already being passed, and more are on the way. Like, you may know the AI Act just passed by European Parliament this June. Notably, it's for high-risk systems, and they define that as systems that can affect sort of the human experience, so systems that might decide healthcare treatment or might decide like border policies or customs kind of stuff, high-risk AI systems. And there are future considerations in the US that are currently in draft. There's one from Senator John Thune's office, and the big standard setting bodies, the NIST, the ISOs, they're working very diligently on this, but they're nowhere near done. So the ISO AI working group, I want to say they've already published 20 different documents, but they've got another 32 in the pipeline. And the documents that they've published are getting us thinking in the way they're thinking, but the big ones, the big sort of security ISO standard, it's being drafted to the point where we can't even read it yet. But they do have some that they've released that we've been very helpful with. So I'd say that most big AI security standards are still forthcoming. It's sort of such a nascent space that it hasn't been figured out yet. Now, we have already started incorporating AI content into the CSF, and we'll talk more about that shortly. So the current AI assurance landscape is, to me, as follows. Let's say I'm early on the adoption curve, I'm an early adopter, and I've already done this amazing job of evaluating all my AI security risks in a manner that my entire organization feels like we've got it right. And not only that, we've implemented the right level of controls and we've got it right. Currently, there's no generally accepted view of, is my definition of right by way of AI control and AI security risk management, is that a good enough definition of right? Is that bar sort of agreed upon in the industry? No, there's not right now. And there's also no current reliable way to demonstrate to stakeholders that you've got that. It'd be great to be able to get on the phone with every single organization that is asking, how are you controlling your your AI risks? But you can't do it. And so sort of the assess once, report money concept, sort of we got a big PDF that's going to answer all your questions. We've got a great way to communicate the strength of our AI program. It doesn't exist yet. More likely, maybe you're in the other camp, not the camp that I just described, where you're hoping that sort of this is figured out before you need it. But know that we're working diligently on it. And I think I'll pass it off to the next person. There you go. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I think as Jeremy has shared, we start with getting our mindset right because we're starting where we're starting today. And so the mindset is it's different. It's something we need to anticipate. But then as we think about that, what is our response to that point of view? Do we respond by waiting or do we respond by starting? And I've talked to a few people recently that are already getting like risk questionnaires from large, complex organizations asking in-depth questions about their use of AI, including, where is the data? What data is it? Questions that, in many cases, the AI using organization won't be able to answer because those are the questions to be answered by the large language model providers, the people who have actually initially trained these models and these systems and incorporated this vast trove of internet data. So we're starting where we all are starting, and we're starting with the fact that build on what we already know, build on what we already have available, and recognize the fact that we're running a marathon, not a sprint, and we're launching an AI assurance program. Congratulations, you're a part of the launch because we are launching today. I'll give you a QR code at the end so you can look at the strategy document and you can start to actually visualize and incorporate how we're approaching this problem. And it's very akin to how we've approached every problem we've looked at. So as Jeremy's mentioned, we're starting with what is already available. We know there's content out there, and I will say there's a lot of content out there that we have evaluated and looked at from a harmonization perspective that for a variety of reasons we're just not sure it's the right content yet. It's not sure it's ready yet. But we think there's content that with harmonization could be very valuable to all of us as we start down our AI journey, because we start with knowing what our risks are and evaluating the risk of our system. And that's really part of us establishing that early mindset as security leaders and as people focused upon governance and compliance problems, to say we need to both acknowledge the distinction and the difference in the platform, and at the same time leverage the practices and capabilities and approaches we already use every day to measure and demonstrate the maturity of our systems. So with our 11.2 release forthcoming, thanks to the hard work of Bimal's team and others, we will have the risk management framework content established in the 11.2 version of CSF. For those that like the specifics, that will be the NIST AI Risk Management Framework version 1, the only version existing, and ISO 23894. And what's really interesting about ISO 23894 specifically, but also NIST, is the fact that when you actually look at those frameworks, they do get into the risk management dimensions that one should consider from an AI ideation and instantiation perspective. But in most every case, it feeds back to consistent and common ways to think about risk management. So think about this particular threat and risk, but think about it the way you think about other risks and incorporate it into your risk management system. So we think this is highly valuable for organizations starting out or that have already begun the journey, because the first thing to speak to from a defensibility perspective is we have considered the risk of our system, we have sound governance practices across our enterprise, and we have leadership engaged on the problem. So with that said, it's an early space, as Omar mentioned earlier. The security controls that are quite AI specific are going to continue to evolve. And you've heard us talk over the last day, and you'll hear over the next 2 days about how we view the CSF as adaptive, threat adaptive. And we see this as just another example of us being agile and able to extend and amplify and modify the CSF in a very energetic way to keep up with the pace of change in the areas that each of you that we serve need to be focused and thinking about. So we know that there is work already done. We know there is work that will be done, and we make a commitment to you that HITRUST will be with you on a very regular basis throughout 24 as we step into this journey of already giving you a framework for AI risk management, which will also extend, I'm sure, but also starting to get into the control space as you look at what controls can I validate and perform assurances against that I can use to demonstrate that I am a mature organization consuming AI. So that's thing one, and we're very excited about that. And my thanks to the team that's been working so hard on this. It is not a trivial exercise. There's so much new content and language and concept to work on with this, but we built the CSF for this purpose, and I think it's going to serve us well in this. So the second thing, equally important, is how do I know that I can be seen as a reliable company through reliable assurances? And so we are going to offer AI assurances both around security risk and AI risk management outcomes. Those will evolve quickly as the controls evolve, and this is really a tremendous opportunity for those of you that know you're working in this space, because you can actually start and get ahead. And as these controls are evolving and being defined and being rationalized, and it's not us defining them, it's the industry defining them, you have the opportunity to say, okay, at some point downstream, I'm going to need an assurance around this, and here's how I can do it. I can do it with HITRUST. I can do it with a system I already rely upon. And of course, it doesn't impact what you already do around scope, because you already have your assurance program that you're delivering, and that is awesome as well. So we've got a portfolio strategy. I'm going to ask my colleague Bimal to talk about it in a minute, that of reports and assurances that you will be able to rely on as they start to roll out in the next year, and as you see more and more specificity coming with that. Part of that will be insight reports, and we have this compliance insight report capability that we're launching that will allow you to answer the questions people will be asking you. Assurance reports are certainly a very valuable way to answer a question. We know that there will be regulators, there will be others that will be saying specifically, how do you address certain risks and certain threats in the AI space? As those questions become known and as those needs for validation become apparent, having a report that you can demonstrate that you've not only answered those questions, but you have reliability and you have assurance behind how you've looked at that problem is going to be really valuable. So this reliable assurance system is going to be something that you can really build upon and look to as you're working in your AI space. So one thing Jeremy's taught me, because he and his team are really the people that work so diligently on partnering across our service provider network, both with CSPs and others, is just how much AI and AI systems are a shared responsibility and an inheritance problem. And the shared responsibility nature of this is just like cloud. If we all remember, 4 or 5 years ago, we all built separate cloud teams. We had dedicated cloud security programs. We probably had different cloud security patterns and strategies. And I would argue that many organizations now, that is their IT security pattern. And they rely heavily upon the security features and security capabilities of their underlying service providers, and most specifically people like Microsoft Azure, people like Amazon Web Services, people like Google and GCP. those are the people that are oftentimes running your IT for you within your systems. And guess what? If you look across the leadership in the companies that are really out on the forefront of generative AI and large language models, you have companies that host those services and have built and provision and provide you these large language models. And then you have leaders like companies like Databricks that are out there helping organizations consume and do that with high quality and high integrity. And so we really think the combination of those people together are going to carry much of the load for organizations that are saying, I just want to provide good experiences for my customers, and I want to make the engagement cleaner, and I may want to get into some really innovative business specific types of use cases. And so that ability to go to your service providers, whether it be Microsoft with their instantiation of OpenAI, or Google with BART, or Amazon Web Services having just announced they're purchasing a very large company, you can go to them and say, I need these assurances, and I know what I need because HITRUST has defined them in the shared responsibility model, and I need to inherit from you that you do this well. And so just like you do with cloud services every day, we would position that using inheritance and shared responsibility is really key and critical to your ability to actually execute this at scale. Because the alternative is, well, I use Microsoft, or I use Amazon, or I use Google, and I assume they do it right because they're a credible company. And as we know, we can't really have assumptions. We have to know, what do they do? What do I need to do so that what they do works? And what do we have to understand together about our shared responsibilities? And so those three things, delivered at scale and delivered in a way that you can prove, is going to really help be an accelerator for you in your AI journey.
Yeah, and Robert, I'll add another quick point on sort of this concept of you might be thinking, man, we've heard a lot about the shared responsibility and inheritance program at HITRUST, and part of that too was to help set the groundwork for what we're about to do with that program, in that we're extending it to cover sort of some AI concepts in sort of a big way. It'll be a very big change for the program, because we felt it fundamental to achieving the goal of communicating reliable AI assurances. This shared responsibility machinery has to be extended to cover it. And a quick example, if you look at OWASP, they just published a top 10 for large language models. And if you start to look at those top 10 controls, what you're supposed to be doing, you think to yourself, okay, if I'm just a user of someone else's model, do I have to do that? Or does the model provider have to do that? And as you go through all the top 10, and there are others as well, other sort of lists of sort of mitigations and sort of AI control lists. You look at, like, MITRE has, I think it's Atlas, Adversarial AI Threat Landscape, really good too. They have mitigations in there, and as you read the mitigations in there and the others, you say, okay, some of this should be performed by the user, the model, the user of the model, but a lot of this needs to be performed by the trainer of the model, by the builder of the model, by the hoster of the model. And if we don't extend these shared responsibilities, as you start to get into those control lists of the AI musts, you say, okay, I can do this part. I can evaluate, for example, my AI risk landscape really well, thoroughly on my side. But when it comes to training the data, there's a lot of stuff about anti-poisoning and stuff like that. Like, I'm not training the data at all. Microsoft or AWS is. I need assurances from them that they're doing those things, so I don't have to worry about that threat coming to fruition, right? So that this is key to this piece of it.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think what we're actually going to find is that much of that lifting will be from the service provider, as you noted, Jeremy. But we still have a responsibility as the individual that's being held accountable for our use of AI to know that we got it right. And I think where we've seen historically in cybersecurity, oftentimes where the challenges emerge, if you translate challenges to bad days or breaches, it's sometimes where the seams between responsibilities appear. I thought they had that. They thought I had it. Nobody had it. Or in many cases, we're actually duplicating effort because we're both working the same problem, both of which are adverse outcomes, and we'd like to avoid those. And then lastly, the fourth point, and then I'll get kind of a little bit into how it works behind the scenes and thinking about things like risk and risk management and where you start in terms of your journey with this, and Bimal and I'll explore that together, is the fact that we are discovering this together. We know the journey is going to require the best minds across the space, and so we are actively already engaging with industry leaders and model providers We had a terrific workshop on Monday for CISOs on AI risk and thinking about that. That was hosted by Omar at Databricks. We're so grateful for the leadership there. And I think there are just so many safeguards that we're going to need to identify still. To that point earlier about we've got what we know, and we've got what we still need to know. And then the last thing I'll say about this is that we have a lot to build on. So if you look at, while AI is different and it's certainly a learning system and a different application of IT science, it's going to oftentimes rely on the same types of foundational cybersecurity and information protection controls and safeguards that we already have defined in the CSF. So we think there's a lot of value actually, and will be a lot of value in doing assurances with our existing portfolio for the underlying and supporting infrastructure, and then we'll layer those AI controls on top. So I think there's work to be done here to promote that. And we intend to be quite forward-looking and communicating on this with you all in terms of letting you know what we're learning and thinking and growing in together. So where do we start? And I think now I'm going to ask us to look. This is great, HITRUST. Thank you. This is a good start. But where do we start? Where do each of us think about, and what can we rely on in the near days to help us down this journey? So I think the reason we think the risk management framework is such an important starting point is because everybody that's done a CISSP or any security accreditation, you're always going to have those initial questions about where do you start. Well, you have to start with understanding your inherent risk and quantifying that risk and being able to identify what things I need to manage in terms of applying controls and mitigations to the risk that I see based on the threat landscape and likelihood and impacts of all of that. And so, as Jeremy has already noted, AI is more like an athlete training than it is building or laying out an athletic field or building a football or any of those things that are very formulistic. And so, if I've heard one thing, and we just did the podcast, we talked to many leaders in the industry about what they thought about this, and I think universally they all started with it's an enterprise risk or it's a business risk problem. So when you sit down and you look at what we're releasing in 11.2, and you look at how we've harmonized the risk management frameworks to make them more palatable for you all, you'll actually see that you're actually asking those foundational questions. And I won't go into that in detail today. We'll probably do a separate session on that in the future sometime as a webinar. But there's a lot of risk dimensions to get into. And as I looked at that, and as I've been talking to people, I think part of it's a mind shift for us. And as we work with our business teams and partners, I would actually offer that AI is, as silly as it sounds to say this on stage, AI is not sentient, and it can act autonomously, but it's not autonomous in the sense of a human would be autonomous. And so it's very easy, I think, from an overall risk consideration perspective, to look at AI as a black box and say, well, the AI did this, or the AI generated this, or it created this, and to almost give it a level of autonomy that is not helpful when you think about the risk management dimension of it. Because when we talk about AI as intrinsically good, evil, it could be biased, it can be neutral, it can be ethical, or you can certainly have unethical AI or unethical applications of AI. All of that's attributable to our risk management decisions as security leaders. So how we evaluate the threats and risks to the system, how we start to anticipate those outcomes and understand how to build safeguards into the system. We test for the behaviors that are undesirable. We mitigate inputs to the system that will create adverse logic outcomes. And it really ultimately is a risk management problem. So it's a little bit of a good housekeeping warning kind of thing. But I think it's really important for us to look at the risk management of this. Is like we are not victim as technology leaders to the AI system. We are in control of the system. Now we can all talk about our favorite science fiction books that say that's different, but I maintain that for where we are right now, that is the journey we're starting on.
Yeah, and I'll add too that the big standard setting bodies have both released I say NIST and ISO, have both released their sort of AI risk management guidance, but not their AI big security control standards yet. So that's reflective of, I think everyone is thinking about okay, as we eat this very large elephant, start with risk management.
And that's where we're starting as well. So one thing I think is really important is where to start. You can start now. While you can't necessarily clearly define what the AI control space looks like, you know all of the things you need to do to secure the system around your AI. And actually, Omar and Databricks had a terrific slide that I saw in the workshop on Monday. I'll try to paraphrase it, but it showed the AI as this small, the machine learning and AI feature as this small module in the middle of a very large data universe. So the data warehouses, the data visualization tooling, the data quality checking, the testing, the validation, all of that is around the core of machine learning system. And all of that is based on traditional IT things that we already know how to secure and we already know how to perform assurance on. So it sits on physical infrastructure, it's on cloud, usually IT based with data, very large amounts of data. And then the very top of that is the AI application and the services that provide access to AI, whether it be web services or chats or other things. So all of that's on top of well-known infrastructure and security controls. So you can do assurances today on those well-known platforms. And it's a great place to start because if you have that behind you underneath the system, once the AI controls arrive, you've got, I'd argue 90% of the work done already because you know how the underlying platforms are secured and how they're operating from a security maturity point of view. So keep that in mind. It's easy to say, I got to wait for it. I know we have to wait for some of it and define it together, but we can start today, and I think that's really important. And actually, our friends at Google actually make this very point. It's a lot of words on this slide, but I'm going to emphasize the 2 red points, is know and review what the existing security controls are today that apply to your AI system and evaluate those relevance of those controls using available frameworks specific to AI threats. So that's actually a very detailed and very well-structured way of saying what I just said, is that you can start with your risk, you can evaluate those against the existing security control space to mitigate a large portion of those risks, and you can get started today. And for those that are interested, this is from the Google Secure AI Framework Approach, or SAFE. A very friendly document. I think it's something that's very digestible and well worth the read if you're new to this and want to get a little smarter about how to think about some of these things. And just summing it up before I turn it over to Bimal to get into the real specifics here and take us to the end, is I'm saying you begin today. Don't wait. Begin today with a solid foundation and articulate the AI risks. And in the workshop we had on Monday, we actually wrapped up. We had this very conversation. I said, we don't want to be too far ahead, but we don't want to be reacting when we need to be moving quickly. And do we start now or do we wait? And the consensus was widely from people that are doing this every day. Start now, start with what you know, start with what you have. Begin with that solid foundation and start to understand the controls that you already have in place that you will very likely be building upon. And by the way, they're just good controls to have in place because you're a secure and well-governed system if you have them. And then as those AI controls evolve, we can add those right on top. You'll see tools and ways that we'll promote to help you do that. And so it's just thinking about it as a systematic problem. And so if I'm asked the question from a board member or from an executive leader, okay, Robert, is AI, thank you. Okay, Robert, is AI, do we know what to do today? I would say we both know and we yet don't know. We know what we know and we know where to start. And we know that we can identify risks and we can do risk management considerations around this. And we know there'll be more AI controls we will be investing in as they are defined. And we certainly know we will be relying on our partners that provide the AI systems and services that we are consuming, and we need to know what they're doing and what we're doing with them. So that's the systemic approach we would promote. So.
Thanks, Robert. So this leads us to the question of what's in store for HITRUST in providing assurances over AI. And I can tell you that we're very excited about what's coming here over the course of the next year. So we're going to start with our foundational concept of assess once, report many, right? Because we want to make sure that the assessment process is as efficient as possible. And we think that starts with what Robert was talking about with starting with your basic foundational security controls. So for us, that means starting with that threat adaptive core of assessments. So whether that's an E1, which is good cybersecurity hygiene, or all the way to an R2, which represents that highest level of assurance. You need to start with those foundational controls in order to begin securing your AI deployment. And I think part of that efficiency of the assessment process also comes because it's supported by our cloud security shared responsibilities matrix and shared responsibilities model, right? So you're able to inherit those controls from that cloud service provider, streamlining the amount of assessment work you have to do. And as Jeremy and Robert both discussed, we're going to be building an AI shared responsibilities model with some leading AI providers. And we're excited about that because we think that's going to help define which controls the provider is really responsible for, which controls the user of the model is really responsible for, and where there is a shared responsibility between the two parties, similar to what we did with the cloud shared responsibilities model. Now, you might be saying, okay, that sounds like a good place to start, but where does that really take us in terms of AI-specific content and AI-specific controls? And as Robert talked about, this is still a very nascent space, and Jeremy mentioned it as well, where a lot of the big standards development organizations are still writing their content. But with the release of 11.2, which is tentatively scheduled for Tuesday, so mark your calendars, we'll introduce our first two AI-based sources, so the NIST AI risk management framework and the ISO framework that Jeremy mentioned as well. So those will be incorporated into 11.2 upon its release. And then as you see subsequent releases of the CSF, you'll see an increasing velocity and number of AI sources coming into the framework, which we're really excited about, that the standards team is able to deliver those quickly as those standards development organizations finalize and publish those authoritative sources. Now, one thing we're going to do is similar to the approach that we took with the E1 and the I1. We're not just going to, I would say, foist all these sources upon you. We're actually going to cull them and look for the best ones. And this kind of tailoring will help us set the bar for what is acceptable AI security. And I think that's one of the things I'm most excited about, is going through that content and being able to look at what really is the cream of the crop, what's really relevant, and what's really where are the most important controls, and what are the ones that best address the risk.
Yeah, and I'll add too, we're talking about the AI risk management content that will be in 11.2. For those very familiar with the framework, that's going to be heavy in domain 17, right? The risk management domain. So don't expect all the rest of the AI security controls across all the other domains. That's the work left to be done on specifically how you start to address those risks. The AI content in domain 17 will help you start to think about those AI risks from a risk management and risk assessment perspective.
Right. So how can you act now, and really what can you do to get started? So what I would say is, first and foremost, start by understanding what your AI risks are. Right. Leverage the content that will be coming out in 11.2 with the AI risk management framework to begin to understand where your AI risks reside, and kind of where you may have some unmitigated risk with controls that aren't already in place. Third, let's look at shared responsibility with both your cloud and AI service providers. So, you may have a very good grasp of where shared responsibilities lie with your cloud provider, but do you have that same understanding with your AI provider? And I think that one may be a little bit more challenging, just as you begin to understand what you're responsible for versus what the provider is responsible for versus what really is shared. And it may require several conversations with your provider just to understand exactly what you're contracted for and where those responsibilities lie. And finally, we want you guys to engage with us. I think I call this the beginning of the collaboration, not the end. There's going to be multiple opportunities as we move forward to help with development of that AI shared responsibilities model and also development of that AI certification ultimately. We want that feedback. We want to know what experiences you're having with your AI providers, and also we want the provider perspective as well. We think all those are extremely important to building a great shared responsibilities model and ultimately a great certification that's well received amongst your relying parties as well. And I think, remember, the work that you do now is extremely important. The preparation lays the foundation for you to be ready to go when you get that first request for an AI certification from that relying party to know exactly how you secured your AI environment. So, as Robert alluded to earlier, you can scan this QR code to download our AI strategy document. I'd also say, let's get started by documenting our AI risk management considerations, and then also begin thinking about your current readiness work that you're doing in preparation for an assessment. And for those of you that have existing certifications, whether it's an E1, I1, or R2, start thinking about which of those certifications might be impacted by AI, and where you may need to look at modifying scope or including additional controls. Start that work now. Don't stick your head in the sand and don't pretend that it's going to go away. With that said, I think we have time for a couple of questions. Questions or comments. If you have cheap shots, save those from Ryan when he comes back up on stage. Questions?
I'll add that if you're passionate about this space and you'd like to potentially join working groups to help us develop some of that shared responsibility content and that shared responsibility model, please reach out, let me know, or let Robert know. There may be some people here that participated in the shared responsibility working groups when we started the original shared responsibility model several years ago. That's the kind of thing we're working on now. We're not going to do it alone. So if you're interested in participating in a working group, there is a time commitment, but do reach out. Alternatively, if you want to help without the big time commitment, we do plan on releasing several of these things for public comment before it actually goes live and part of the machinery. So there's a way to participate without sort of the working group effort as well. So do be on the lookout for those coming out very shortly, those invites and those opportunities to comment on this model.
Hey, Bimal, I don't appreciate the cheap shot comment. Just for the audience, you all have talked about several times engaging and being a part of the solution. Can you talk quickly about some of the mechanisms that people can reach out to you through?
Yeah, so I can get started. And, I think Jeremy mentioned we'll publish content for public comment, similar to what we did with the risk management and assessment handbooks, where we invite feedback, and there'll be a mechanism to provide feedback. And then also there'll be an opportunity to join working groups on the shared responsibility model as well, in terms of development there, where we want to get that feedback. I would say you can definitely always reach out to myself, Robert, Jeremy directly. We're always happy to entertain those conversations, get your feedback, and understand your perspective. For those of you that are subscribers, you can reach out to your CSM as well. They're always a great sounding board for ideas and can help connect you with the appropriate subject matter expert at HITRUST. And then if you're ever lost and don't know where to go, our support team is great. They can help direct you appropriately to the appropriate resource.
Yeah, and then there's always the HITRUST subreddit, which we're pretty active on. So there's that. Reach out and comment. So there's good resources there as well.
I would add that you could expect. We promise not to spam you, but you can expect a lot of insights coming out from us in this area. All of those will have a feedback opportunity. So we're both putting out positions, points of view on this, but we'll also, as Jeremy noted and Bimal noted, we'll be putting out drafts and position papers that we'll invite feedback on. But we're actually pretty easy to reach, as I think most of you know. But again, commitment personally to engage with you on this, because we are learning quickly that some of you and many of you are experiencing dimensions of this that we haven't yet seen. We're all new to this together. And I would invite, our partners that we're already working with, people like Omar, who's a great leader at Databricks, and his team and others. They're also great resources just to hear from and work with. If you already have relationships with them, they're just super engaging on this stuff. So,
quick question. First, I appreciate Cheap Shots going to Ryan. I think it's a lot of fun. We've got a great group of assessors also, and how would you encourage them to get involved in this?
I think first and foremost, this is a new space, so we will be working closely with assessors through the Assessor Council as we define the space and as we put out our approach on this. I would also invite assessors to be the voice of the customer and the voice of the market. You're out there talking to a number of people about these problems. I'm curious to hear what the market is expressing to you about concerns about AI risk broadly. As we always do, Bimal, I know our change management, our approach to engage our assessors, make sure they're very aware of what we're doing here is going to be an important part of this journey. But I think this is an opportunity to say, hey, what are you thinking? And this is what we're hearing, and lean in with us, not being told by us, but helping us create the future together. And I would really invite that type of collaboration. All right. Thank you all so very much. Thank you.